There are a lot of characters in history that have never been punished for their failures. Too many to count, really, and I'm not talking about the guys who never got what they deserved for doing war crimes. There's plenty of those, but the kind of person that I find fascinating is more so the absolute failure of a person that somehow, through twists of fate, manages to continue to grow in influence despite having no idea what they're doing. This is the case for one Xiuquan, a man who, by all accounts, should have done nothing particularly of note during his entire life, but due to a bout of psychosis and living in a time where centuries of history were happening in months, managed to fail upwards into being a beloved and cherished figure in Chinese history, even having a memorial museum dedicated to him by Chairman Mao and the Communist Party of China. Now, on paper, this doesn't make any sense because the Chinese Communist Party outlaws any organized religion, and Xiuquan was a religious leader, but through his bizarre story, you'll see how this fucking idiot has managed to accidentally inspire cultural and political revolution across China, as well as create dangerous cults that still exist to this day and still kill people in the 21st century. This is the Ballad of Chinese Jesus. This first bit is going to be a lot of history, so for the sake of this still being a funny video, I'm going to punch it up with a few wacky sound effects and shit. Xiuquan was born with a different name that doesn't matter to a farming family. He was a Hakka, a distinct ethnic group in China that's a part of the overall Han people group. When he was young, he fancied himself a scholar, and his parents spent all their fortune getting him into good schools so that he could take the Chinese civil service exam and fail miserably. After becoming a farmer and teacher back home for a while, he returned to take the exams again, this time having built up the cash himself to supersede his parents, show his independence, and failed miserably again. It's at this point that Xiuquan met the man who would set him on the path to greatness, Edwin Stevens. Now, Stevens was also a fuck-up. He was a member of an American missionary group whose primary goal was to build hospitals and distribute medicine while spreading the gospel. But Stevens' interests in his earlier expeditions seemed to primarily revolve around identifying good kinds of tea to plunder back to Great Britain, which he was not even a citizen of. This guy, upon Xiuquan's failure at the second examination, handed him over a pamphlet that was essentially a Chinese chick tract. Xiuquan looked over it once, and then threw it in the back of his closet to forget about it forever. It wasn't until Xiuquan failed the examination a third time that this pamphlet came back to bite him, as he had a several days-long psychological break. Xiuquan's vision involved him ascending to heaven and meeting with his spiritual family, whatever the hell that meant. Basically, he saw a bunch of people he identified as his relatives giving him the talk. That being the talk that the world is full of demons and it was his job to take care of them. His brother was revealed to be Jesus Christ himself, spiritually, and he was given the title of the Second Messiah. During this vision, he was given the name that I've been calling him for this entire video, Xiuquan, and shown Confucius, being punished in some unspecified way for being a demon in disguise. He awoke, and as most people who are on a mission from God do, immediately began spreading the word to anyone unfortunate enough to be waiting outside the local Applebee's. Hong's real crusade began after failing the examination for a fourth time, whereupon he was truly convinced that his visions were truth and set about burning local statues and asking his family members to bring him swords to kill demons with. Havoc ensues, and Xiuquan has a surprising amount of success in his Jesus journey, a lot of the local Hakka population rallying behind him as both a religious and political figure. Now, Xiuquan's position at this point in time is not special by any means. Tons of cult leaders start off as complete failures of people that have visions from the heavens and suddenly realize that they're actually Buddha or something. What's special about Xiuquan is the thoroughly unhinged butterfly effect that spirals off of this man, leading to Shenyun, China before communism, performing in your hometown this June. I'm going to skip over a few years here where Xiuquan just builds his forces up more and more, and I use the term forces very intentionally. Xiuquan and his god worshippers are a legitimate political force at this point, and by the year 1850 have successfully translated the Bible into Chinese, with alterations to make Xiuquan look better, and accumulated around 30,000 followers. There are some internal kerfuffles, like the time Xiuquan goes to learn how to be racist from a Southern Baptist and accidentally gets robbed of all his demon-slaying equipment. Or how about when Hong and his right-hand man were both gone at the same time for one day and came back to find two other people claiming to be deities and just rolled with it. It was a time peppered with odd occurrences, but this was the calm before the storm. In 1950, Xiuquan and his followers were in the city of Jintian, all 30,000 of them, when the powers that be decided that this was getting out of hand and ordered them to leave. The cops were sent to deal with them and got murdered, so the government attacked the group. This ended with Xiuquan's followers brutally decimating the army and emerging victorious. They then declared, seemingly because it was just the thing to do after overthrowing a government leader, that they were their own country and would like to be treated as such. Now, Xiuquan wasn't smart, and he wasn't really a military commander, but he had two things on his side that made this rebellion even possible to begin with. Xiuquan's Hakka heritage made him representative of minority groups in the area rebelling against the Manchu government. And he also had religious conviction on his side, which is a far greater motivating factor than whatever minimum wage the Chinese army was offering. At this point, Hong's heavenly kingdom was steadily gaining ground, capturing the city of Nanjing after a failed assault in the city of Guilin. Here, it just becomes the usual cult shit, honestly. Xiuquan bans sex and segregates men and women in his kingdom except for him, who is allowed to fuck as much as he wants. He implemented a lot of economic systems that kind of resemble communism if you squint, and murdered a lot of his closest followers in a purge out of paranoia. The usual stuff, I could have just said it went like pretty much every cult does and got the message across. The Chinese government at the time, the Qing dynasty, is not very competent, so it needs help from Western forces to retake Nanjing. Xiuquan dies during this siege, but eventually the entire thing is swept under the wide umbrella of rebellions against the Qing dynasty that got a lot farther than they had any right to, but ultimately failed due to Western intervention. So what does this guy's failed revolution have to do with anything nowadays? Well, here's where you may be surprised. When the Republic of China was overthrown and Chairman Mao took control of mainland China, strict policies about organized religion were made. This is because the Chinese Communist Party correctly deduced that any organized religion in any large capacity would be a threat to a centralized government and planned economy. Tale as old as time, and one would think that Xiuquan would be quietly relegated to the dustbin of history because of this, but oddly, that's not the case. Xiuquan is celebrated in modern China as a revolutionary hero who led a grassroots uprising against a repressive government, which I guess is true, but it's more so like a under new management situation. So this scenario, where previous revolutionaries include a cult leader, plants some seeds, especially when the political propaganda of the People's Republic of China was in full force. Meet Li Hongzhi, a New Age religious philosopher who grew in popularity in the 90s as the head of a new Qigong movement called Falun Gong. You may have heard of Falun Gong as a persecuted religion whose followers are secretly being assassinated by CCP agents. What you probably haven't heard is that Falun Gong believes aliens are the ones who invented airplanes for the sake of making humanity more gay. Yeah, it's a fucking nutjob group persecuted for being a doomsday cult that hides behind breathing exercises to mask the fact it's a multinational money-making scheme that runs multiple far-right news publications and media groups, including the previously mentioned Shen Yun. This guy is, by all accounts, a huge piece of shit, and his followers are just as brainwashed as your average Scientology member, but where he links back to old Hongy Boy is that his background is very similar. He too was a failure in school, something that both his own account and the account of the Chinese government will corroborate. The only difference is that his own account touches it up with excuses about how he couldn't focus on his math tests because he was talking to Buddha through telepathy. He too was swept up in a spiritual fad in the area, this one being Qigong mysticism as opposed to the newly introduced missionary Christianity, and eventually started a massive empire as a messianic figure, and he's far from the only modern-day analog. Eastern Lightning, another persecuted religious minority in China. Just ignore the fact that their missionaries kidnapped 34 people of a rival church, cut several people's ears and tongues off, stomped a woman to death in front of her 7-year-old child in a McDonald's, and you might be able to squeeze a little bit of sympathy out of Reddit for these fuckheads. They believe that the woman Yang Xiangbing is the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and their leader Zhao Weishan is currently in the USA under political asylum. Why don't we go east a bit more? The Unification Church of South Korea, commonly known as the Moonies, are another doomsday cult that funds and influences far-right-wing agitprop worldwide. Their leader, Sun Myung Moon, claimed to be the reincarnated Jesus Christ until he died in 2012 and still hasn't risen from the dead. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? Now, I'm not saying that Hong Xiuquan laid the groundwork for modern-day doomsday cults in Asia, but there are a lot of similar factors here that I think you shouldn't ignore. Does this say something about the instability of these countries, that the tale of Hong Xiuquan repeats itself over and over again with new outcasts of the educational system each time? Is this a look into how the CIA funds extremist groups to the same extent as Al-Qaeda or ISIS, but in countries like China, which then go on to fund American interests right back? Does the tale of Hong Xiuquan and those who came after him reflect the instinct of humanity to follow a leader if given one, regardless of how dubious their claims are? Now, it's actually fun as hell to be Jesus. Ain't no point to it. Just go out and get a bag. Shit is easy. I can be Jesus. You're Jesus. Everyone is Jesus. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to help the channel grow. It is We are currently working on the next video in the road trip series. It's going to be a while, and it is expensive. Hopefully I will be able to get a couple more videos out before that. I've got a few topics that I'm going to do some research on, as well as a topic from the road trip that we're actually going to make an individual video about, probably. No promises, but yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. So subscribe, make sure you don't miss any of that. Like the video, hit the bell, comment, share it around, do all that stuff. Thanks. That's all.